Okay, so it is now 2 o'clock Eastern, which is where I sit. So I'm going to slowly get started. I won't get into too much of the content until 1 or 2 minutes after, just to give everybody some time, but we appreciate you taking the time to join us. My name is Paul Staz, so I lead the sales team over here at StrongPoint. On the call with me today, I have Rick Rosler. So Rick wears many hats at StrongPoint. He's one of our customer success leads, but also plays an important role for our product team. And so I've got Rick on here with me. Between the two of us, he is definitely the one that is more credible. So if you're going to skip half of this webinar, skip the first half when I'm talking and listen to him in the second half when he's talking. That'll be much more useful information for everybody, I'm sure. So, all jokes aside, we're here to talk about impact analysis today. I think that out of everything that we do, this is likely the most interesting or common challenge that comes up. So I personally, I think out of all of the webinars that we do, this is my favorite. What we're going to cover today is just quickly go through kind of a shared definition of what is impact analysis. And it's not our definition, just kind of one publicly available off of Wikipedia, I believe, to be honest. But what is it? And then what I want to talk about next is unstructured versus structured impact analysis. This is something that we talk a lot more about. I don't think you'll find that on Wikipedia, but it's something that I think can be a real game changer for a lot of businesses out there. And so I'll talk briefly about the differences between the two. And then once we've talked about those things, we'll jump into a product demonstration. So I'm going to start with some very basic things, and then I'll pass it over to Rick, who's going to give some more complex examples of where a lot of companies or Salesforce users, we'll call them, would stumble when going through an impact analysis process and what could eventually lead to some headaches for them. So without further ado, I will thank you again all for coming, and I'm going to jump right in. So the first slide here is, what is impact analysis? Well, the definition that we found was identifying the potential consequences of a change, or estimating what needs to be modified to accomplish a change. And so I'm sure that all of you are doing some version of this today, but this is kind of the shared definition that we wanted to begin with. So what am I going to break, and what do I need to do to ensure that it doesn't break is maybe a more casual way of putting it. So the next thing that I want to jump into is really an analogy, because that's one of my favorite things to do. And I think that the iceberg analogy works particularly well. So an iceberg, only 10% of it is what you can see up above water, and the other 90% is really what's down underneath. And if you were to ask the Titanic, something that often goes along with icebergs, what part did they hit and what part sunk the ship? Well, it was everything underwater that sunk the ship. Nobody really hits the top of an iceberg. They all hit the meat of it right down below the surface, the stuff that you can't really see. And so I think that this is really very similar to your typical Salesforce org. If you're going to make a change, you can see 10% of what you're changing, but you can't really see 90% of what you're changing. And that's where people typically stumble. And that's why a good, solid impact analysis process is so critically important. So, what are you trying to figure out when you are doing impact analysis? Well, first of all, I think you're trying to uncover technical risk. If I make a change to this pick list, am I going to impact an Apex class or a workflow rule? Am I going to break something? So you're trying to uncover technical risk, but it doesn't just stop there either. You're also trying to identify organizational risk. So for example, am I going to make a change to a field that is actually being used inside a report? And there you're not breaking things necessarily, you're just changing them. So now somebody that's using a report has slightly different data, and they may not even know it. And that has a much more significant impact on the business in some ways, because at least if it's broken, you know it's broken. But if it's different, you might not know that. And thirdly, you're trying to uncover regulatory risk. So regulatory risk is really for publicly traded companies where financials are inside Salesforce, and you're looking at making changes to them, and now all of a sudden that's in scope for SOX. So SOX would be considered regulatory risk. Or if you're a biotech or a life sciences company or somebody that's manufacturing medical devices, then you have a different set of regulatory requirements now falling up under FDA. And God forbid that you're a publicly traded medical device company that has financials in scope inside Salesforce, because then you've got multiple different types of compliance to be worried about. And then you can bring in personal information and things like that too, just to complicate your lives even more. So, ultimately, we try to bucket risk out into these three different categories. So technical risk, am I going to break anything? Organizational risk, what business processes could this change impact? And then thirdly, regulatory risk. That's really what you're trying to uncover, I think. So talked in the agenda about unstructured versus structured impact analysis. So what are these things and what are the differences between them? So unstructured impact analysis, this is typically more of just like an ad hoc process. You're looking to make a change, and somebody on the team or a group of people on the team are going to go out and manually investigate what needs to be done and what's involved. So this is being done in different ways by different people using different techniques. Typically a much more manual process, and it's also therefore, as mentioned in the first bullet, it's inconsistent, and it's also prone to human error. Even the best people out there will sometimes make mistakes. They'll overlook something, they'll miss it, right? So that's unstructured impact analysis, and the biggest piece is that it's just done differently by different types of people from one change to the next, and that brings in kind of an additional level of instability to the changes being made inside the org. So, obviously, you've probably already guessed what structured impact analysis is, but structured impact analysis is a lot more consistent, a lot more predictable. It's done the same way every time, regardless of who is doing it. In order to accomplish that, obviously, it's going to be a much more automated process. You're leaning on tools to do it, and it's therefore a lot less prone to human error. Now, I was looking through kind of when we were building content for this, I was looking through some of the Salesforce forums and looking up impact analysis to see what people were saying about it. And, one of the things that really jumped out at me is that there's so many ways that this can be done. And, you don't need to buy a tool to do it. You can build all kinds of crazy things. So we were looking at some pretty in-depth scripts that people were running to uncover dependencies, for example. And what really jumped out at me is as it was making my head spin, I was coming back to this idea of, well, not everybody can do this. Not everybody's technical enough to do this. And you're likely in a position where you're sending your best people after impact analysis rather than, or I shouldn't say best, your most technical people after impact analysis rather than sending your most technical people after actually, building and customizing and changing your org and delivering value to the business. And that's kind of the one thing that I wanted to drill home here is that, the beauty of StrongPoint is that we're providing the same capabilities to every member of your team. Anybody can use StrongPoint to do kind of best-in-class impact analysis, from BAs and junior admins all the way up to your most technical resources. And so that's one thing that as we're now going to start jumping into a demo, that's one thing that I want you to think of a little bit is, how can we improve our overall delivery or release process by having, people use tools to do planning and impact analysis. So that's what we'll jump right into. The kind of process that will follow for the demo is I'm going to show you a little bit about unstructured impact analysis using StrongPoint. So you don't need to follow a rigid process in order to get a lot of value. You can still have people that are digging in and using tools to do more of ad hoc research. So that's what I'll show you to start. And then Rick will show you kind of some more formal examples. So first step here is I'm in our dependency relationship diagram. And so let's say that a couple changes were proposed on the account object. So with StrongPoint, you can quickly navigate to the account object. We'll automatically show you everything that sits on the account object. And then you can click through to understand impact and dependencies. So let's say the first one is this company social media field. So if I want to look at this, I can see here that this is a multi-pick list. It's owned by Sasha. I know the API name and the date last used. And I can see downstream that this could impact some layouts and a couple reports or report in a list view. So no real automation built in. If I wanted to go down multiple layers, I can easily do that to see, say, the sources for a layout. But ultimately, this is a relatively easy picture for me to kind of put together in a relatively short period of time. A different example for you, though. So let's say I click on this maintenance type. So this is also a multi-pick list. It's also on the account object. So at the surface, not very different, coming back to the iceberg analogy, but what's going on down behind the scenes is a lot different. So I'm also seeing a number of layouts here. When I get into the reports, there's some more reports and list views. I can also see here that there's things like, maintenance packages sold. So maybe somebody's reporting on revenue recognition or the starting of sales reporting building up here. As I scroll down further, I can see that there's an Apex class, an approval process, and a couple workflow rules as well. So here I'm now seeing just some quick investigation that there's probably a lot more complexity. You may want to dig in more detail here, so which I can do. So with StrongPoint, we've created customization records running in the background to store information about all of your individual customizations. So I can come into a screen like this instead of just going through the DRD. I can see dependencies here as well. I can link to all of those customization pages that we've built. Quick overview of metadata shows me things like when something was last modified and who last modified it and who originally created it. Down here on the bottom right-hand side, I can see more information about the date last used, how frequently it's populated wherever it exists, for example. I can also go into related lists and I can see any version of it that has existed since StrongPoint's installed. So an enhanced audit log for you, where we're able to track new values, old values, who made the change, what the exact diff was, highlighting the differences for you. So this is a great way for you to go in and look at, okay, what's the current state of this? What's it connected to? How is it being used? How's it being changed over time? What are the previous versions of it? You'd be able to use StrongPoint and just search for those things directly using a search tool instead. You can also tweak this in a few different ways by doing things like looking at packages or not, filtering down just by type, or looking at who's created it or when they've modified. And we can give you those lists to look into. And then finally, if you don't want to search for one thing directly or look just from the object level down, we also have an impact search form that we've built, but you can obviously customize this if you need to include other columns. But what I've done here, for example, is I've filtered to show you everything on the account object. So filtered that as my base record here. And then the customization name is appearing on the far left, date last used, date last modified. And then what this is going to show me across here on the right-hand side is data sources and scripts and workflows that are connected to it, report searches and dashboards that are connected to it. So this is a great way to see all in one place any downstream dependencies that a particular group of components may have. Right. So these are all examples of how you could leverage StrongPoint to perform unstructured impact analysis. Maybe you're a one admin shop or a smaller team of some kind. And this is really just a way to enable those people to be more productive, especially useful if there's partners involved or if you're new to the org or new to the team, whatever the case may be. This is a great way to help you understand what's going on kind of down behind the scenes, but again, in more of an unstructured way. It's a bit more manual, not fully automated for you, but we're at least presenting great information. So with that, I will pause. I'll stop my share here. I'm going to pass it over to Rick and let him share his screen, and he'll walk you through kind of the second stage of the demo here. And if any questions pop up along the way, please feel free to drop them into the chat box or into the question tool, and we'll make sure to answer those.
All right, thank you, Paul. So as Paul said, I'm going to be focused on more of the automated impact analysis that we do. And kind of the core component of StrongPoint that I'm going to focus on here is the change request. And I'm going to talk about a number of ideas kind of that surround the change request and how that's used to help you manage things. I'm starting here with a view actually from JIRA. So many of you may have JIRA or ServiceNow as external ticketing systems that you use to manage your backlog and development activities. And StrongPoint has integrations directly with these two systems. So here I have a JIRA ticket where I've created a little demo that has picked up one customization from the org, which is called this discount percentage field that's on the opportunity object. And directly from JIRA, for as many customizations as I have added, I can look at the comprehensive list of impacts for that customization, in this case, this custom field. So I get a summary of kind of why it's an important field. And then I have, as Paul showed on a different screen, the complete list of customizations that it's related to. So I can do this analysis directly from JIRA without ever having to go into StrongPoint. If I want to, I can also just go directly to the change request from JIRA. So now we're in StrongPoint, and we're going to see the change request that was automatically created via the JIRA synchronization. And so here you see the list of customizations. In this case, there's only one. And again, I can see the impact analysis, the same one that we saw on the JIRA page, as well as a bunch of other information about this. I want to point out quickly this change policy. So in StrongPoint, you have the ability to create different policies that apply in different situations. And Paul mentioned technical risk, organizational risk, and regulatory risk as things that we try to help you manage. So for the next two things that we look at, we'll be focused on those specific areas and how the policy records, excuse me, are tied into this. So for organizational risk, we have a policy called the financial changes policy. And for any policy that you create, you have the ability to either select individual customizations. In this case, we've added a number of finance-related reports, as well as finance-related code that are attached to this policy. And so whenever StrongPoint sees customizations that are attached to the change request that are also controlled by the policy, it'll pull up a change level. In this case, it says full software development lifecycle that's mandated by that policy. We can also look, of course, at the impact analysis for this. And again, this is the comprehensive set of dependencies for all of the customizations that are attached to this change request. And so you can see here that, that this approval process and this flow are tied to a lot of different things within Salesforce. And so obviously all of these would have to be looked at in order to get a comprehensive picture of what is going to be changed and what might be affected by it. So that's kind of an example of organizational risk driven by an organizational policy. For regulatory risk, we store a lot of data about the metadata. So in this case, we have a custom field on the account object, which is the license key, and it's an encrypted field. So Paul mentioned, we can tell a pick list from a multi-pick list and so forth. So encrypted fields are things that we know something about. And so I've created an encrypted field policy. And so this license key is attached to the policy, as well as some personal information fields are tied to that policy. So anytime those fields appear on a on a change request, it will trigger this encrypted field policy. And again, we can see on the impact analysis report things that are related to it. In this case, there's an Apex class that references the license key that we would need to pay careful attention to. One of the more interesting things that you can do with these dependencies, though, and impact analysis, is to create reports and alerts. So, for example, and I don't have an example for this to show you, but for one of our customers, I helped them write a flow such that anytime an Apex class added a new dependency to an encrypted field, it would automatically alert whoever was listed on the encrypted field policy record. So that was a very cool feature. They wanted that information in real time. We could have also picked that up just from by creating a report of any Apex class that referred to an encrypted field, and setting the appropriate date filters so that we could and then send out those reports on a daily or weekly basis if you don't need it in real time. And so I think I'm going to conclude with that, the fact that we're on platform, all of this data is available basically in two custom objects that you can write reports or flows or triggers, whatever, against. Make the dependency analysis and impact analysis pretty powerful tools for your org in order to keep track of what's going on and who's changing what. So I will hand it back over to Paul to wrap up.
Thank you, Rick. So what Rick just walked you through were kind of a couple more complex examples of structured impact analysis. And so just to highlight some of the things that we covered in the demo, or that we covered in the slides rather. So structured impact analysis is really what you're looking at on this change request, right? You've got a set of rules that have been set up in the background, and some of those come out of box, or at least one policy or rule for technical risk comes out of the box, and then you can customize this further to kind of bring into scope the more organizational or regulatory issues that you might be watching for. But then there's a tool that's doing it all for you. So on this change request, you're adding customizations into scope. And like Rick showed you, you can be doing this inside JIRA or ServiceNow. And so once you've added in the things that you're going to be making changes to, StrongPoint will automatically tell you the level of change control required. It'll automatically tell you the approvals that would be necessary if you've said that approvals are necessary. And it's going to highlight for you down below in the impact analysis portion. It's going to show you specifically the ones that you need to be worried about. It's going to give you plain English descriptions or plain language descriptions of why you need to be worried about. So it's going to say that there's, dependent scripts, as it does there in front of you, and it'll give you impacted customization. So these are the dependencies that will be or could be touched by a change to the particular component that you're looking at. And so this is what we mean by having, a great set of tools available to anybody. You don't need to be the most technical person in the room to be able to figure out dependencies coded into scripts. We can extract that for you and alert you to those risks. And This is really a great way for you to bring all of this information very far forward within your change process, enabling better conversations early, being able to allocate resources more effectively, and in the end, really, I think just like prioritize your backlog and deliver more meaningful changes in less time. So I'll pause there. Are there any questions? You can either drop them into chat or into Q&A. And at first we can focus in on this, but if anybody has any other questions about StrongPoint, even if it's things that we haven't covered today, I haven't warned Rick about this, but I'm more than happy to put him on the spot and make him answer things that he wasn't expecting to. So if there are any questions, now is a great time for us to chat for an extra few minutes. So I'll pause for a second to see if any come in. And if no questions come in, that just means that Rick and I did a fantastic job. So we'll sit tight for another minute or two. And we do have one, thankfully. I was getting a little bit worried there. So are you able to build custom reports to outline the dependencies? So yeah, so I showed that example earlier in our customization impact form, and you are able to customize what you show there specifically. So you can choose a specific type of dependency that you're looking at, or you can add in additional columns to pull out any of your own Salesforce data or even our own. So the answer there is yes. So next question is there a licensing model for just the impact analysis? And so kind of. Our tool comes in 3 different product tiers, and it depends on what type of, if you're looking for like the change request based impact analysis, then that's included in our middle tier. But we're more than happy to kind of work with you to understand specifically how you want to use the tool, and we don't want to sell you features that you're not going to use. So the answer there is yes, there is a licensing model for just the impact analysis. We can talk through that. Patty asks if this recording will be available after the call, and so yes, it will. We'll be sending out a copy of the recording, as well as a one-pager that summarizes it. Another question is, does the DRD include managed packages? And so, let's see here. So Rick answered that question by text, but I'll read it out loud for everybody else. So yes, although the Apex class analysis is limited because there is typically no visibility to the Apex class code in a managed package. So thanks for that proactive answer there, Rick. Yeah, so another question that just kind of popped up in response to impact analysis, if that was just available on its own. So they clarified and said that they're trying to diagnose a legacy org. And so that's a super common challenge. We haven't covered it today, but we also have a variety of cleanup and optimization tools as well. So if you're looking at an old org, we can very easily and quickly document it, even if it's just with one of our base products. You can get a sense of kind of what's under the hood. Our cleanup tools can help look at things like date last used and dependencies and risk levels to identify, what in here is not being used or has not been used in a long time. We've even got an automated report cleanup tool so that you can immediately clean up every report that is, say, more than 13 months old or more than 25 months old, or hasn't been used in 25 months, should I say, and you can add in some additional rules there if you need to. So if you're dealing with org merges or kind of takeover through acquisition or whatever the case may be, looking at something that's old and customized and maybe a bit messy, that's definitely something that we can help you out with. And I believe that is it. Another question. So this one's one for Rick. So any ability to show external data warehouse fields mapping? Pass that over to Rick if you have any idea.
So I don't know exactly. In in Salesforce, you can have an external object that's mapped to some external system, and so we will document those external objects and fields. We can't. I don't remember what the metadata looks like for that. I don't know if we can tell you where it points to, but assuming that you know that those fields are mapped to an external system, we'll create all the dependencies for those external object fields, and you could potentially, set up a policy to track anything that's related to those.
I hope that makes sense. If not, we're happy to take it offline. We can unpack that question a little bit more, and we'll go from there. So we're 1 minute over time. If there's any other questions, happy to keep chatting. But that's the end of the scheduled webinar. Really appreciate everybody taking the time. Hopefully, you learned some new things. Even if it doesn't mean looking at our product, hopefully we gave you some additional thoughts on impact analysis and some of the things that you need to be looking at. So appreciate your time, everybody, and we'll look forward to hopefully being in touch directly, or we can maybe see you on another webinar sometime soon. Thank you.